And warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and we've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to have a two-part chat today with one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson, who does such great work over at the Rob's Best Bet Show over at youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. Going to dive in on a wide variety of different topics with him. Last few days, we've been starting to kick it up with regards to the secret scrimmages. What does he take away from those? We're going to be hitting that right away. We're also going to be taking a look at some of these teams that might be coming in a little bit undervalued, how to take a look at some of these first-year head coaches, and then in part number two, going to be looking at the bump that you get with regards to a year two coach, a coach that has been able to find their bearings a little bit more. Take a look at some of the teams that Rob is a little bit bullish/bearish on, and also some of the, shall we say, parity, some of the interest in the Big Ten, because I don't believe there's a top 10 team in that conference, and I don't think that there's a team really outside like the top 75, top 80 in that conference. So we've got a lot of ground to cover with Rob today, and I do want you to do me a solid here. If you have something that you want to hear on this podcast, a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, please fire those in one of two ways, as we are now 6 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. Rosters are set, and we've got most of the conference previews done. I've only got 4 left, so I do want to know what you want to hear on this podcast, so that way I can get you what you need to get set for the upcoming season, and you've got one or two ways to be able to fire in what you want to hear on this podcast. First one is my Twitter/X timeline, at @unit_D1. Keep in mind, letters they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I ask because did not get in any Twitter/X questions, so please do help me out there, just like this man helps us out whenever he joins me. Rob Donaldson, he does such great work handicapping so many different things, whether that be college basketball. He's doing great work on the football front, both college and pro. I know that he's done amazing work with baseball, and he actually joins my other podcast, Baseball Betting Show, quite a bit as well. Wealth of knowledge, does just great work all 12 months out of the year on the college basketball front, but always has the bets flowing from one season to the next, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, you know, every single time we do a show together, we're getting closer and closer to college basketball. Now it's pretty much unavoidable where we're doing season previews. We've got schedules, we've got teams sort of solidified, and now we're into that secret scrimmage and reporting type season.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because how do you take a look at these secret scrimmages, these charity exhibitions, which we're seeing more and more of, and I am a fan of those, but how much do you take from those, / do you take anything at all from those?
I've taken a stance now where I'm not taking anything from it, because we have seen teams be reported as, oh, this team looks kind of dreadful, and then they come out and they actually surprise teams early on, and we've seen the exact opposite be the case where, oh man, this team just lost to, St. Augustine D3 College, and now it's time to hit the panic button, and then, who knows? I feel like with a lot of different reports out there, it's kind of hard to, gauge whether or not a team is just trying to get, that chemistry built up and whether they're just trying to mesh. I think that's part of the preseason buildup that we haven't seen in the past, and now that it's prevalent to the public, I feel like people don't know really how to react to that.
Yep, I think so as well. And how much do you think that with regards to these exhibitions, these secret scrimmages, what have you, that it's just a bunch of coaches that, for lack of a better term, they're utilizing it as essentially an extra practice, which I feel like you should be doing to start with, because it's a scrimmage, it's not a real game to start with, rather than what we would consider to be more or less a tune-up. I feel like there's just a lot of coaches that they utilize these to see, all right, what can I throw at the wall and see what sticks / what does not.
Absolutely, and we've seen it. One of the more prevalent preseason sports is Major League Baseball, and in particular, when you're looking at the pitchers that go through spring training, we see a lot of guys struggle in spring training against these guys who are going to be AA and AAA players for a bulk of that year, because they're trying out, new things with spin and new things with how to locate pitches or how to try to kind of set up sequences. And a lot of that isn't really the actual face value product that you're going to get once the actual season starts. And I kind of view these secret scrimmages in a very similar vein, where they might be trying out different rotations that they're not planning to use once the season actually kicks off, but rather just kind of the feel of, hey, let's see how these different players mesh with one another, because we might not be able to get that chance when the season actually starts.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I do think that that is something that is so important to be mindful of. As shown to me on the show, we've got Rob Donaldson, who does great work over at the Rob's Best Bets show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups. Because when it comes to these, and I air quotes here, secret scrimmages, when it comes to the exhibitions, I do want to be seeing the rotations a little bit, because if you're seeing a lot of reports in practice of, hey, insert freshman here has been seeing a lot more burn than expected, then you actually see him out there for a scrimmage, that tells me that, all right, the team might be willing to invest some minutes in him. They might think that there's some upside there, even if he's not playing night number one. He might be playing a little bit more towards the back half of the season. Meanwhile, when you see some of these scrimmages and it's like insert walk-on heroes out there, I probably am going to take that with a little bit less credence, just because I feel like they might be just trying to appease their mom and dad that might be in the stands for that certain scrimmage or exhibition.
Yep, and how many times have we seen it? In particular last year, I remember Michigan State was saying they had a solidified core last year heading into the year with a Tyson Walker and a Malik Hall, AJ Hoggard, a number of other guys who had already been within the program for a good bit. And all of a sudden, we were hearing reports of, oh man, Xavier Booker and Jeremy Fears, these two incoming true freshmen, are going to potentially break the starting lineup and maybe even get six-man role minute time. And I don't think either one of those guys really surpassed 15 minutes a game or even 10 minutes a game throughout the entire season. So when you are looking at it from that standpoint, yes, there's going to be players that I think emerge maybe halfway through or on the back half of a season, but it's not something that in the interim or even just kind of the build up to the season that we really need to be weighing all that heavily, because as we kind of talk about with Major League Baseball and other sports, there's chapters to a college basketball season, and we all need to get out ahead of them.
And I think that you bring up something so interesting as well, because when it comes to trying to figure out the rotations for these transfer every teams, like Louisville quite literally returned 0 points from their team last year, it is a bit of a guessing game as to what their starting five is going to be, and I don't think that Louisville right now knows who their starting five is going to be. Meanwhile, you're bringing up Michigan State, who is bringing back darn near everyone from last year with a few freshmen sprinkled in. Feel like you can have a good idea of who's going to be starting for them as well. How much do you weigh that differently with regards to how you take a look at offseason reports, these scrimmages, what have you, with these brand spanking new teams versus a team that's tried and true, and all throughout this example, Northern Arizona, who brings back north of 90% of their scoring, feel like they're quite a bit more rock solid rather than a team like Louisville that I brought up.
I'll kind of go to this, kind of cliche that I'm sure you and I have used to sort of give out a college basketball pick in the past, but a culture play, or let's believe in the culture with the play, it falls on the coaching staff, right? And the solidified veterans that a team might have. And, you reference a team like Louisville, who literally changed everything. They changed their coaching staff, they changed their player base. And so what I think you have to kind of do, and this is a new landscape of college basketball where we're even kind of talking through something like this, but I really do believe you have to believe in the coaches. And so maybe Louisville isn't going to be a team that I back early on, and maybe that'll be a mistake because I know that team has a ton of high upside, but I kind of want them to work out their kinks with their great coaching staff, this talent pool of players, and then by maybe, the fifth or sixth or seventh game, maybe they're really kind of gelling and being a formidable force in the ACC.
No doubt about it. I think that is so good that you bring that up as well. And I always do feel like these transfer-heavy teams, they are some of the most unpredictable teams with a coach in year number one. Just how do you approach them? Because it certainly is a situation-by-situation basis. I think that that's something that should be done every single time with regards to these teams, but especially with a team with so many new parts like that. But I always find them to be the hardest teams to be able to handicap because they've got, for lack of a better term, and I think that this is a proper term, the most volatility in that with these first-year coaches, with the teams with a whole bunch of transfers, if it turns out really well, you can make a whole bunch of money off of them like you did with South Florida last year. Meanwhile, if it flopperoonies, I still remember Pacific from the 2021-22 season where they went 4-22 against the spread. Well, that's not good too.
Yeah, and even when you're looking at some, guys that we really trusted as head coaches last season, for example, just staring at the Big Ten, Kevin Willard. Let's see how he did. Oh, that was a bad season. Let's look at Mike Rhodes at Penn State. Okay, well, we're not doing so well so far, and you look across all the high major levels of basketball, and you're going to find a case of a guy stepping into a job with a lot of hype and a lot of build up from his previous job that just kind of falls flat. And there's going to be a lot of coaches like that this year. You know, there's going to be a Dusty May at Michigan with a crazy talent pool, and whether or not, you know, he can pull something out of the cap. We brought up Pat Kelsey at Louisville, and you can name a number of different coaches during this coaching carousel that switched to their new destinations. But I do believe that each stop is unique to itself. You just kind of have to have that time period in the middle and through the early periods of them really figuring things out, because I think the best bets are going to be the teams that aren't garnering so much hype early on. And a lot of the teams that are garnering that hype are the teams that did add a new coach or did go crazy in the portal.
Yeah, and I think that it's always so interesting to try to find value on those teams. And I list a sort of team that I try to take a look at in terms of finding value as well, because we know that a lot of people, they like to overreact to what they saw last. And when you hear about things in the offseason like Dusty May going into Michigan, that gets a lot of people all hyped up. Certainly with Louisville, there's a lot of people are excited for what is going to be happening there, because quite frankly, it can't be any worse than what we saw the last 2 seasons under the Payne train. But I look at these teams that maybe they ended the season hot, but it was a little bit more out of sight, out of mind. And the team that I've been bringing up on this podcast the last few days is Temple. They started out something like, I believe it was 7-18, might have been 8-19, something like that. But then they go 8-3 in their last 11 games. But because they didn't make the NCAA tournament, any sort of a postseason tournament, they're not a team that really calls attention to themselves, except for a gambling scandal, which actually, in my opinion, helps out the cause all the more. How about you take a look at those teams? Because I do think that the teams that maybe made a run in the CBI, made a run in their conference tournament, but didn't quite make the NCAA tournament, these are the teams that really built momentum towards the back half of the season, but they're not priced like those teams that were able to make that deep run in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, 100%. And to your point on Temple, they did add, a major player through the portal, actually a couple guys that I really, really liked in terms of Jamal Mashburn and Lynn Greer. And when you are looking at, Adam Fisher and this potential upside for a team like Temple, I'm totally bought in to them being a sneaky team. I think, to your point, some of the teams you can find the best value in are the teams that in the standing section, finish below the midway point. And kind of vice versa, if you're looking at teams who finish at the top of each conference, I'm betting you can find quite a few teams that are going to be fadeable just because of how inflated their lines are heading into the next season. And that's how it is every single year. Sometimes you can kind of believe in a team based on the talent and the coaching and just your perceived upside of what they have. But also you can just kind of play it from a market value standpoint of, I might think this is going to be a top 10 or top 15 or even top 20 team in college basketball. But when we are looking at the totality of it, I think everybody believes that. And because of that, they're probably not going to be getting favorable lines.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that it is going to be so much fun to look at some of these teams that they were able to close out the season with a little bit of momentum, as there is going to be a lot of new look teams as well that had to turn things over from what happened a season ago. As Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Best Show, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think this is a good launching point for part number 2 of our conversation, where Temple also fits a very good example of having a coach in year number 2 that's found their bearings a little bit more, has a bit more of the roster that they want. So we're going to talk about that. Also going to be bringing up the Big Ten, how much parity we might be seeing in that conference and how the margins are so thin in that conference. We're going to be talking about that and so much more with Rob on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peters, and now a part of the Beeson Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now part of the Beeson Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by our good friend Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And we were just talking about Temple and how they were able to close out last year very strong, and they're being slept upon a little bit more because they weren't one of those teams that made a big run in the NCAA tournament. But they also are a team that I like because they have a second-year coach that has been able to do a nice job of assembling the roster this year in a way that he didn't have, it felt like, last year. year. As we know, with Adam Fisher, he's a disciple of that Penn State system under Micah Shrewsbury, where they wanted to chuck up a bunch of threes. Temple wasn't so great at three-point shooting. What do they do in the offseason? They bring in Jamal Mashburn Jr. They also bring in Lynn Greer. That should be able to help out the backcourt, and I do think that because of what we've seen in recent years with Iowa State making a tremendous run in year number one under TJ Otzelberger, they went from winning 2 games against SWAC opponents all the way to the Sweet 16, that fans think that things are going to be turned around overnight, and certainly with the transfer portal, it's easier to be able to get things turned around, but a team like an Iowa State from a few seasons ago is very much the exception rather than the norm. And how much do you take a look at this angle in that sometimes there's unrealistic expectations for some of these coaches in year 1, and heck, even year 3, year 4, perhaps these guys come in a little bit undervalued because they weren't able to necessarily live up to expectations in year number 1, and then they're able to really elevate and exceed.
Oh, 100%. I mean, even look at Loyola Chicago last year, right? And everybody was thinking, oh, well, Valentine, they need to go back to Porter Moser at this point because it's such a disaster. But then, the back half of their season and even, some of the middle parts, they were winning a lot of games and playing high-quality basketball, and I believe finished in either second or third in terms of the regular season A-10 standings, not the actual, conference element performance of it. But when you are looking at a number of those types of coaches, I did bring up one in the Big Ten that probably was getting a little bit disrespected last year because of the actual win-loss record of the team. But when you look at Mike Rhodes in Penn State, I mean, we know how he can be successful at a school like VCU, and a lot of people followed him over from that VCU squad to Penn State, and even Ace Baldwin elected his 5th year of eligibility to come back this next season. If you don't have Penn State somewhere in your top 6 or top 7 in terms of the entire Big Ten standings, I do feel like from that standpoint, they are a very underrated team because I think they're going to be right there in the mix.
And I'm so glad that you bring that up because I look at that entire Big Ten, and I think that that's just going to be very much an underdog and a home team conference, much like it has been in so many years as well, because I feel like we've talked about this on the show once or twice, but I think that it's worth bringing up. Right now, when I take a look at the Big Ten, I don't foresee a single team that's outside the top 75 in all of college basketball. I don't see really a team that's above 10th in all of college basketball as well. And when you get those sorts of conferences where things are just so even, like I feel like it is in the Big Ten, things like travel, what have you, is going to be able to take hold. But also, when you see a big line in a conference like the Big Ten, I think that that's going to present a ton of value all throughout the season.
Oh, 100%. And also when you're kind of thinking about it from the perspective of every single coach in this league has earned their stripes in some kind of way, because this is definitely sort of a coaching league from the standpoint of every single team in college basketball would be kind of happy in a way. Maybe they wouldn't want to part with their current guy, but they would be happy in a way with any one of these coaches replacing their current guy. And, I would even kind of go as far to say, to your point of there not being really an elite team in the Big Ten this year, I feel like there's a lot of very, very good teams in the Big Ten this year that's going to make it a very competitive conference night in and night out, and even out of conference play when we do have those early season, tournaments going on or out of conference play against other high major opponents. I feel like the Big Ten is going to be very competitive from that aspect, but maybe just not in the sense of, a solidified Final Four or championship contender.
Oh, I totally agree with you there. And how much do you feel like that's a lot of college basketball in general? Because even when I take a look at the Big 12, I see a lot of top 10, top 15 teams in that conference with the likes of Iowa State, Kansas, Baylor, Houston. They're all going to be right there at the top. But at the same time, I don't have that one team off the top of mind where I say, oh yeah, they're certainly going to be able to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, because even UConn, who has won each of the last 2 national title games, they lose so much with Donovan Clingan, all those starters being out. Now they have to turn over the reins to Ada Mahaney and company. I just take a look at the entire landscape of college basketball, and I wish I could put it any other way, because I feel like I talk about this a lot with college basketball darn near every year, but it just feels very open coming into the season.
Yeah, and to your point, when I look at the Big 12, if we're kind of comparing it to a conference like the Big Ten, I think the Big Ten is 10 times more deep, top to bottom, than the Big 12, but the elites in the Big 12 are I would say, some of the best teams in all of college basketball year in and year out, especially when you're looking at maybe like the 5 or 6, down that many rows in the Big 12. And for that reason, I do think it's the best conference, because when you are grinding against that many top teams and one little bubble or one little vacuum, I do feel like you're getting the best product on the court. Now, that said, the reason why the Big 12 has had those issues is because once you do get in the tournament, any team can get picked off. And if you don't have, past that 4 or 5 line, a really solidified top team or a team that's very, very good, and there's a massive fall off, well, you're going to see the massive fall off happen in terms of the team surviving to advance, right? And that's kind of where I think the Big 12 has run into some issues, even with them having, I think, the best product in terms of college basketball.
Oh, I'm right there with you. And I do think that is so good that you bring that up, because with the Big 12 adding in there the likes of Colorado State, I think that they're going to be in for a little bit of a rough year this year, along with Arizona State. I just don't know how they hold a candle to so many of these teams. So I am starting to feel a little bit more bullish on BYU, what they've been able to do here in the offseason, and going with a little bit of a different approach, bringing in someone that was at the professional ranks a season ago as an assistant over with the Phoenix Suns. And just as you're doing your research, is there a team, much like I'm finding with BYU, that you're just starting to take a little bit more of a liking to as the season draws closer?
There's a lot of different teams, and I know that we just talked about Penn State, which is definitely a team that would be so heavy on my radar. But if we're also going to throw out another name, and this kind of goes to the point of, believing in almost the hype of it, but I feel like this is a resurgence year for Michigan to a degree, and it's going to be interesting to see where these lines are, because everybody knows who Dusty May is, and so there's going to be a lot of hype behind that hire. There's also a lot of talent pool guys that they brought into the fold on that roster as well, but they also finished at the bottom of the Big Ten last season, so it's going to be a battle of a balance of people kind of leaning on last year's results, and then also looking at the new optimism that came into the fold this year. I do feel like some of their lines are probably going to be inflated early on, and that's why I'm going to be staying away early on. But midway through the season, late in the season, I do feel like Michigan is going to be one of those teams that emerges near the top of the Big Ten.
Yep, and do you think that could be one of those teams that maybe you fade them a little bit early on because there's a lot of hoopla around them, because there's a lot of moving parts, and then they're a team that you might want to be backing more in February and March when they're able to find their bearings, and as a coach that knows how to get it done when it comes to those money months, for lack of a better term?
100%. Yeah, that's exactly my philosophy with this Michigan team. And, to your point, I am 100% staying away in the early goings, because they just might not be gelling. Despite having all that talent on the floor, and despite having Dusty May stepping in, there's going to be an adjustment period. And towards the back end, I do think they're going to be a team that makes a tournament. I do think they're going to be a team that can go into really any environment and have the talent to perform. But, from that standpoint of the betting angle side of things, I do feel like some of their lines in the early goings are going to be very, very inflated.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because a man that is able to go into any environment and perform, a man that is able to get it done and has that pedigree, that would be you, Rob. You do such an amazing job with all of your work, whether that be taking a look at football, basketball, baseball. You do it all. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, really appreciate you always inviting me on, Greg, and I'm excited for getting this college basketball season started as well. And for those who are wanting to follow my picks, in college football, MLB, NFL, leading up to college basketball, you can do so on Twitter at RobDFB, and also over on YouTube at Rob Donaldson. And again, always appreciate it, Greg.
Always love having Rob aboard. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to taking a look at this great game of college basketball. And I know that he, much like myself, doing so much to get set for what is going to be an amazing season. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Junin_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and please do send in those Twitter/X questions, as getting low on conference previews as of right now. We've got 4 left in total. We've got the bigs, the Big Ten, the Big East, the Big 12, and then the SEC, and then from there, we're set for an absolutely amazing season. So do send in those, but I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. Regular season, off season, rain, shine, it does not matter. You're getting a podcast all 366 days this year, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.